I'm just going to go through a few screenshots and what these are. This is the first of 5. These are just 5 studies that I got a screenshot of that reinforce the energy balance model working. So these studies that I'm showing you, they gave a group of subjects that were overweight or that were with obesity. They put them on a diet and they lost weight. There's one study. There's another study. There's another study. There's another study. There's another study. Now, I could have done this for the entire hour that we're together. I could have come up with 300 studies or 800 studies showing you time after time after time that CECO, calories in, calories out, or the energy balance model, it works as it's described. If you reduce caloric intake, you will lose body weight. What about this study? Now I'm going to go into a little bit more detail. This study was published in one of the top academic journals that the world has ever known. It's called the Journal of the American Medical Association. This study recruited over 300 overweight and obese females, and they put them on one of 4 diets for 12 months. So we love the length of this study. And what they wanted to do here was compare all kinds of different diets. So essentially, I'm going to explain it in 2 ways. You can look at the 4 diets as being, one was very low carbohydrate, one was low carbohydrate, one was a little bit high in carbs, and another one was really high in carbs. So depending on how this study works out, if you think carbohydrates are the main factor in weight loss, this study is testing that. The other way to look at this is there was one study with really high dietary fat levels. There was another group that was following a diet that was fairly high, but not super high in dietary fat. Then there was another study that was moderately low dietary fat intake. And then finally, the Ornish diet group, very low fat intake in that diet. So again, this study is testing or hypothesizing, is one diet, whether it's high in carbs or low in carbs, if it's high in fat and low in fat, regardless of what they are, in terms of the macronutrient composition, is there a difference in body weight losses over time? And again, real quick, the Atkins diet was one that was the very low carb or the really high fat. The Zone diet, moderately low carb, moderately high fat. The Learn diet was pretty high carbohydrates, low fat. And then the Ornish diet, very high carbohydrates, very low fat. And at the end of the study, after 12 months of studying this, the only difference, the only statistically significant difference was between the Atkins diet, which was the low carbohydrate diet, and then surprisingly, the next lowest carbohydrate diet. When you compare the high carb versus low fat or low carb and high fat, there was no statistically significant differences in those studies. All right, one more study that I'm going to go into detail here. This was another JAMA study. This was a meta-analysis where they did something very similar. This is where they pulled a bunch of studies that ranged from low carb to high carb or high fat to low fat. And they did this using a meta-analysis. So what is a meta-analysis? That is where you get a bunch of studies. So, and in this study, it happened to be 48, but you get a bunch of studies. You pool all of them together, and then you run a statistical analysis on the results of all of the studies that are included in this meta-analysis. And then you can make conclusions on a large quantity of studies, not just one study or not just 2, but a lot of studies. And in this case, 48 studies were included. And what they were investigating was, is there differences in the weight loss success of clients or subjects that were following popular diets based on differences in macronutrient composition? And when I say this, I do want to impress upon you, most of the macronutrient composition was around manipulating carbs. Some of the diets were high carb, some were low carb, some were high fat and low fat. There wasn't a large difference in the protein intake in these diets. So again, I mentioned this earlier, 48 different studies in this. And you can see some of the actual diets here. We have the Atkins diet again, the South Beach diet, the Zone, they tend to be lower carb. And then we have the Ornish diet, something called the Rosemary Conley diet, which is very high carbohydrate, low fat. And then we have a few diets here, like Jenny Craig, Weight Watchers, that were kind of moderate carb, moderate fat. This table's a little difficult to read, but if you just look at the top row, that tells you the different categories of diets and what the average weight losses were over the 12-month period. And these are in kilograms. So 5 kilograms, almost 6, a little over 7, a little over 7. And basically, when you take all of these studies combined, the researchers made this statement. The weight loss differences between the individual named diets were small, with likely little importance to those seeking weight loss. This supports the practice of recommending any diet that a patient will adhere to in order to lose weight. So this takes me back full circle for a moment. The energy balance model suggests as long as you're in a caloric deficit, you will lose body weight. What I like about that is any diet can be the best diet for somebody. And that's really our job as fitness professionals that work with clients whose goal is to lose body weight. Now, I tend to think, and I'm sure I'll give this lecture, I'm going to make a strong argument in a future Fitness Hub seminar that flexible dieting with high protein intakes is the best diet for most people. But it is not the best diet for everybody. If somebody loves to eat very low carbohydrate foods and they can adhere to that, that is the best diet for them. We have no right and no business promoting individual diets for everybody or specific diets for everybody, because the energy balance, if they can't adhere to it, then that would violate the principle of the energy balance model, which says if you're not in a caloric deficit, you won't lose body weight.